Here I prepare the cylinder head, which entails cleaning the mating surfaces, regrinding the valves and doing a repair to the casting. I'd like to add that working on cylinder heads and especially repairing them is a specialist area of expertise that I do not have, but as the car was effectively a non-runner, I don't have anything to lose and maybe some self-learning to gain. Here is an overview of the cylinder head before I started. There's the timing belt sprocket for the camshaft. Slight damage to this cylinder head which I'm going to have to try and repair. There's the water temperature sender unit and the valves, which will need a bit of a clean. I tried to clean the valves using a Dremel, but although it cleaned the combustion chamber well, it really struggled on the exhaust valve where the deposits were hardened. As you can see, it wasn't really touching the exhaust valves. I concluded that I was better removing the valves to clean them, so I turned my attention to cleaning the cylinder head surface. I stuck with the white 120 grit 3M Roll-Lock bristle disc, as aluminium is a soft metal. I followed this with 240 and 400 grit, wet and dry, lubricated with duck oil. With soft metals like aluminium, you're best sticking with the white 120 grit. The surface of the cylinder head seemed pretty smooth and clean now. The Dremel worked wonders on the cast aluminium, and I finished the exhaust area with 120 Roll-Lock discs. Again, the Dremel worked well on cleaning the injector ports. Now on to removing the intake and exhaust valves. Tools needed will be a valve spring compressor. It is sensible to keep all the parts to each cylinder together. Making a cardboard organiser makes sense at this stage. Make sure not to lose any of the split collets. Should keep all those on a magnetic tray. These little magnetic pickups are actually very handy for this job because you can pick the collets up without actually putting your fingers in there, which obviously is very dangerous if something failed and it caught your finger. So that's one exhaust valve out. The exhaust valves are always a bit smaller. We'll speed this bit up because it's a bit repetitive. Got to do it 8 times. Cardboard organiser really does come in handy here because it's very advisable to keep all the individual parts together for each cylinder. So that's all the exhaust valves out. Now onto the inlet valves. And then on to the last valve. Now all 8 valves have been removed, we best collect the 8 washers that the springs sit against and remove the rubber valve seals, as these will need replacing. The tools I used was a magnetic pickup and a dedicated valve removing tool. I thought I'd best check all these washers with a vernier just to make sure that they actually were all the same thickness, which they appeared to be, so I then just removed them all. Valve seal puller was very cheap. It certainly makes life easy on this. Stops you slipping with a pair of pliers. Valve seals just pop over the valve stem and prevents oil getting washed, too much oil washing down there into the combustion chambers. And that's how it sits with the spring on top. And you have 2 collets at the top. Let's pull the rest of these off now. What the little valve seals look like. We'll need changing now. I removed the spark plugs with a 16mm socket and cleaned the combustion chambers. The Dremel was suitable for this task. I'm only going to show one cylinder being done. Obviously you've got to do the same for the other 3. I used a slow speed die grinder with a soft brass wire wheel to remove the carbon build-up on the valves and the stems. Because of the tight tolerances of the valve stems and the guides, I avoided touching the stems where they pass through the cylinder head, as I felt there was a risk of damaging the surface. I found it was probably safer to do one side of the valve first, then rotate the valve. This way it avoided the grinder digging in onto the opposite side of the valve, which possibly could do some damage. So it was easy just to turn it and then do that again away from the edge. Definitely quite stubborn on these exhaust valves. The inlet valves have just come straight off. Look at that, nice and easy. So here I was careful to only get the wire brush onto the very back of the valves and avoid scratching the stems further up. Now on to the regrinding of the valve seats. For this you require the following: some fine grinding paste, a valve lapping tool or a drill powered lapping tool. So the grinding paste comes in fine and coarse. I understand that if you need coarse, then really the head should be looked at by a specialist. So I'm just going to stick with fine. So we just pop the valve back in, and then using one of these suction plunger things, we rotate the valve. Then you lift it 90 degrees and keep doing that until it's all nice and smooth. And you can hear the pitch change as it becomes cleaner and smoother. And you just got to do that 8 times. On a 16 valve engine, 16 times. Now you can get a drill powered version of this, which oscillates the valve backwards and forwards. So we'll have a go with that and see what difference that makes. So the idea is, it just oscillates the valve backwards and forwards on the one side. On the other side, it just rotates continuously. Does all the work for you. At least it seems to stay on the valve, instead of keep popping off. Remember to remove all traces of the grinding paste, because it will damage the engine. There we are, that looks pretty clean. Tool seems to work. Yes, and clean it all down. I use a bit of paraffin here to make sure all the paste is out. And don't forget to do the valves as well. So things are looking a bit cleaner now. In the head gasket kit, you get a new camshaft seal. You need a 7.87mm locking pin, probably 8mm, and a 16mm socket. And don't forget you need torque wrench set to 80 Nm for the M11 plain washer or 45 Nm for the M10 captive washer. So this is what the new camshaft seal looks like. And you will need to lock the camshaft's sprocket. I think probably 8mm would work on that. So with a 16mm socket, we remove the sprocket. You might find it easier to actually drill a very small hole in each side of this and then screw in one of those self-tapping screws and then pull. I think that would be more effective than using a screwdriver where you may damage the surfaces. Make sure it's all clean before the new seal goes in. And then if you pre-oil the seal, you should be able to just slip it on carefully, making sure not to damage anything. And then I used a 36mm socket and gently tapped it in. When tapping it in, try and drive it in straight. Make sure it's not going in at an angle. And then put the sprocket back on, noting the camshaft keyway. And then we will need to tighten that back up to the correct torque setting. I believe it's 80 Newton meters if you have the plain washer, or 45 Newton meters if there's a captive washer. Now to oil and push the 8 valve stem seals on, and also to replace the 8 valves. The parts of each valve consist of the valve, the washer the spring sits against, the spring itself, the spring collar, and the 2 segments of the split collet. So with a little bit of light oil inside the seal, you should be able to just pop them all back on. They easily push on, and we'll speed up the rest of this. Here goes. So make sure the valve is clean and then apply some oil to help it slide nicely into the new seal. That's a nice clean sound. I've already put the washers back on, so I've done the first valve. So this is the second valve. It's definitely quite a fiddly job. So push the spring in, and then if you put a little bit of grease onto the collet, that helps it stick in place. So then really you want to use pliers for this, not your fingers. And just poke it in there very carefully. It's not easy. As long as those collets are in place, you release the spring and it snaps them back in. Then give them a donk with a mallet just to make sure they're settled in and don't pop back off. And then on to the last valve. There's no point showing all the others going in, but I've taken a different camera angle on this one to try and help show the collets going back on. There's that washer that the spring sits against. Make sure they're all in place. Okay, so from this camera angle, hopefully you can get a good look at the collets and how they sit on the head of the valve. So putting a bit of grease on. This time I'm going to use long nose pliers. I think putting your fingers in there is just too dangerous. Greasing them definitely makes them stick in there quite nicely. Just make sure the collets are actually seated in the edge, in that rim at the top. And then give it another quick donk with a mallet to make sure that it's settled. Looking inside one of the inlet ports, the valve seems to be all pretty clean now. This is the area that can get choked up on newer direct injection engines, where a lot of the recirculated gases are fed back into the engine to meet the tighter emission standards. I had one last issue with this cylinder head. When my son bought the car, part of the head had been snapped away and an attempted repair had been made using RTV sealant. This didn't work and oil was running out of the head down the back of the engine. I wondered if I could repair this with a drill bit and JB Weld. So this is quite a big break. I presume the previous owner would have had reports on an MOT about the oil dripping down from this engine. So I'm going to start with cleaning the area using the Dremel. And doing the same on the piece that's broken away. Well, it's looking clean if nothing else. Then I thought, well, if I drill a hole through this piece, I could insert an old drill bit and hopefully that would give the JB Weld more surface area to get a purchase onto and hopefully hold it in position. I then used a burr bit on the Dremel to try and roughen the area up quite a bit, so hopefully again the JB Weld could sort of get a good purchase onto the metal. Okay, so my old drill bit will poke through there nicely. And my theory is if I cover that in JB Weld, but hopefully it will hold. Don't forget to clean it all and degrease it. So I'll mix it in equal proportions and see if this is going to work. I had smeared a small amount on the actual brake itself underneath, and I did later use a big clamp to hold it in position, because JB Weld seems to be quite liquid, so it was a case of sort of moving the cylinder head continuously and for a few hours while it was starting to harden up. Otherwise it kept sort of bulging. It would literally run away from the area I wanted it. So it was a case of keep moving the cylinder head back and forth sort of every hour. I mean, I have no idea if this is actually going to be a solution to this. I hear good reports of JB Weld. They say it can repair cylinder blocks and things like that. So hopefully this is only a minor repair. The repair is looking good. So give that 24 hours. And this is how it looked 24 hours later. Seems pretty solid. Time will tell. I presume it must be better than RTV sealant. So thank you for watching, and please see part 4 where I fit the head gasket.